Hi everyone, my name is Armine Bazikyan, and this month I wanted to talk to you about a type of trust called discretionary trusts and how you may be able to utilize it for your beneficiaries. Now, a discretionary trust is an irrevocable trust that's set up to protect assets for the beneficiary. So essentially think of it as a basket, and you will put things into the basket for your beneficiary, but it'll have some restrictions or some provisions in there that limit how the beneficiary will utilize these assets. So the best way to always get into complex topics, of course, is by way of example. So we'll get into some examples that'll help illustrate what it exactly does and how it benefits the beneficiary, and why it may be the right type of trust for your beneficiaries. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about who we're trying to protect these assets from, or for what purpose. So a lot of times there will be a need to protect assets from the beneficiary themselves. So a lot of times the beneficiary will have terrible spending habits, or will have some other problems, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, whatever it may be, that the person will want to protect against. So there might be something wrong with the individual beneficiary themselves that will require the need to set up a discretionary trust. There may be a purpose behind doing it for ex-spouses or creditors or lawsuits, or the beneficiary's liability from other things, professional liability or personal liability. So depending on what scenario the beneficiary is in, we might either be trying to protect the assets from the beneficiary themselves squandering it away, or from people in the beneficiary's life that might take the money from them, or from the things that might happen. So it may be this may happen in the future in the beneficiary's life, and we just want to protect against the possibility of it happening. So those are kind of the things that we envision happening around the beneficiary in their world that we're trying to protect against. So going back, a discretionary trust, again, is an irrevocable trust that's set up to protect the assets. And the best way is through these illustrations. So let's say John, the dad in this scenario, sets up a trust, and in the trust he tells me to write, just give it to my kids completely. I have $500,000 sitting in the bank, and I want you to give half of it to Sally and half of it to Sam. So within my trust provisions, we have a distribution provision that kind of reads, $500,000 to be distributed equally among Sally and Sam outright, or we may use the word free of trust. When you see the words free of trust or outright, legally that means that you can just hand them the money. I'm okay with you handing over the money to my son and daughter. So in that scenario, the trustee, whoever that may be, will cut a check from John's trust, $250,000 to Sam, $250,000 to Sally in their names, and hand it over and be done with it. So let's say in that same hypothetical, Sam goes out, grabs his check, takes it to the bank, and deposits it into a joint bank account that he shares with his wife. He deposits the money and then moves on with life. A few years later, he finds out that his wife is divorcing him. And during that divorce proceeding, that joint bank account is going to be split in half as a community asset, and she's going to walk away with half of that inheritance. So that is an unintended consequence that John, the dad, might not have wanted, right? If he wanted Sam and his wife to have this $250 equally, he would have put that in the trust. He would have said, hey, Sam and your wife, you get $250. But he didn't. He wanted Sam to have it. So his intent was for only his son to take it. But here we are a few years later, and the wife walks away, the ex-wife walks away with half of it. So in that scenario, the unintended consequence is this ex-spouse or divorce proceeding that kind of claws at the assets. Let's say Sally, the daughter, is a little bit smarter, right? So she's a bit more cautious with her inheritance, and she takes the check and she deposits it into a separate bank account that she has just in her name. She's also married, but she decides not to deposit it into a community bank account, into a joint account. So she keeps it separate. It's just hers. Great. That means that if her husband leaves her and they get a divorce, He has no claim to this asset, but Sally is a crazy spender. She likes charging up her credit cards, and eventually, over the course of the next several years, let's say she runs a $70,000 credit card bill, and she stops making payments on it for whatever reason. Well, these credit card companies, when they come after Sally, they will be able to go after this bank account that she has. And that inheritance will all of a sudden be used to pay off her credit card debts. So that is also an unintended consequence. So, John might be in a scenario where he says, I know based on my daughter's lifestyle that she's not great with money and that she's frivolous with money and she's going to spend this inheritance, and I want it to last for a period of time in her life. And so those conversations would lead us to possibly setting up a discretionary trust for Sally. Similarly, if he said, hey, my son is responsible, but he is in a relationship with a woman who I think they're not having a great relationship. There may be a divorce that comes along, or even though they have a great relationship, I want to protect him against a possible divorce. So we might have set up a similar kind of discretionary trust for Sam. So those are the conversations that we have during an estate planning meeting that lets us as the attorney understand exactly what your needs are and what your family dynamics are and what the personalities are, and then we recommend certain types of trust based on that. So that's how a discretionary trust would work. So let's say instead of just giving it outright, John had that conversation with me and we decided to set up a discretionary trust for Sally. His goal was that this money would last her at least 15 years. So we might have a discretionary trust set up where we distribute that $250 in increments, let's say in 4 increments at various points in her life, or at different ages in her life, or at the anniversary mark of his death, or something along those lines. That way, even though she would have gotten small amounts throughout the years, a large chunk of it would have been held back in a discretionary trust that would have been guarded against her creditors. The creditors would not be able to get to it because we would have protected it. It would have been in this basket, not in her name directly. So that's kind of how these discretionary trusts work. And the great thing about them is that you can make them as specific or limiting that you want, or you can make them as broad or general as you like. But the key component in all of these is understanding the personality of your beneficiary and customizing the trust distribution for that person based on their lifestyle and their spending habits and their personalities. So you may have a provision for Sam that looks very different from a provision for Sally, and that's completely okay. So these are kind of the tools that you could utilize with your estate planning. Discretionary trusts, again, is a trust that's set up to protect the assets for the beneficiaries. And again, that might be from themselves, or it might be from someone else trying to cause harm to them or take away their assets. But regardless, it's a tool that you can utilize. It's a type of trust that we can implement for you. So if you'd like to sit down and discuss your existing estate plan to actually see what it says, and I can help you understand it better and see if it's actually what you would want done, please feel free to give me a call. If you'd like to set up a trust, we are also here to help you set up the right type of trust for your beneficiaries, and I'd be happy to sit down with you and discuss the details that are specific to your life and your beneficiaries and your assets. Give us a call.